Hey, today we are going to be talking about the X100V. So just so you guys are more familiar with my perspective, I have owned a couple of these X100 series cameras, as well as a couple of the XPRO series cameras. And with the X100 series cameras, I've had the X100S and the X100F. And I actually owned the X100S after the X100F because, the F showed me that these cameras are really great and designed with like minimalism and simplicity in mind, a lot like the other Fujifilm cameras, but especially these X100 series cameras, and even the X100F had a lot of features that I just didn't need in a camera like this. And fast forward to now, I'm trying the X100V, so I want to let you know what I think about this camera. Interesting story, I actually received the DURA Black XPRO3 the same day I received this camera, and initially I told myself, I'm gonna grab the X100V as much as I can because, Fujifilm, they lent this camera to me. Thank you, Fujifilm. And I had a limited amount of time. I think we're just over 30 days now where I've been using this camera just about every day. And initially I was like, I'm gonna have the XPRO3. So let me just use this camera as much as I can to get as much experience as I could in that limited amount of time. And while that was my initial motivation to grab this camera as much as I could, instead of the XPRO3, it kind of just started to turn out that I preferred to grab this camera more than the XPRO3, which is not something I expected because I've owned the XPRO3 before and I've owned the X100F before, and I always preferred grabbing the XPRO3 just because I prefer the build quality and the aesthetic of that camera a bit more. But there's something special about this X100V camera that really makes you want to kind of grab it and just take pictures wherever you go. And I think it's not just one thing, it's a bunch of things. So the smaller form factor of this camera obviously is a plus. If you're going to be using the XPRO series cameras, unless you have the 18mm lens or the Pancake 27mm lens, you're not really going to be matching the form factor of this. And you're going to have a lens that protrudes more. So it's harder just to grab that camera and stick it in your coat pocket or your cargo shorts pocket. I mean, if you take a look at this camera, it just has a really slim form factor, and it's about the same as every other X100 series camera. So if you are used to the size of those, then you'll definitely be at home with the size of this camera. But the cool thing about this also is that the quality of the image that you get at this form factor is really great, because if you're using an XPRO series camera, that 27mm lens is actually an f2.8 lens. So you won't be getting as much of that low light capability or the amount of subject separation that you can get with a lens like this. And I did have access to both of the conversion lenses. So I had the WCL and the TCL, which are both great lenses in their own right, and I'll talk about that in a separate video. But with the kind of the original form factor and the lens that is fixed inside the camera, the image quality is just, it's awesome. And that kind of is a segue into what I wanted to talk about next, which is the lens itself. But before we talk about the image quality, I want to talk about the build of this camera a little bit. And remember, this is coming from someone that's tried two of the other X100 series cameras, so the S and the F. And I will say that I prefer this build the most out of all of the X100 series cameras. So this is I would say the most kind of professional and elegant design that they've been able to create with these cameras. And not that the previous cameras felt, you know, unprofessional, but I think simply put, this camera just feels a little bit more professional than the previous iteration. So the design language is very simple and very clean, and that just kind of translates to a very elegant looking camera. And yeah, that's kind of what I can say about that. And just as a quick comparison to the XPRO3 series camera, especially the DURA Black, which is my favorite version of that camera, I would still say that I do prefer the XPRO3 design, but this is definitely almost just as good in a different way. So again, very hard to explain because those cameras are pretty similar, but I do think that those special Dura finish cameras on the XPRO3 kind of adds just a little bit something special, and I think that's why I prefer it. So I think maybe if I was just talking about the standard XPRO3 black camera, then, you know, I think that this might actually beat that out. So in terms of design, that was a little bit confusing, so I hope you were able to take away something from what I just said. But one more note about the actual design of this camera is that it did take a cue from the XPRO3 series cameras, and I want to say that the XPRO3 series camera came first, but it does have a very similar design language in that the layout of the buttons it's just a very minimal design, which I love. I love that they got rid of the D-pad, because that's something that kind of made the camera look pretty busy, and you know, I just think that this is a more professional look. So we talked about the build and design of the camera, and you know, like I said, that's that small, compact size of the camera is really kind of what makes this such an awesome camera. But add on to that the image quality and the versatility of this camera, then you really start to see where the magic is with this. The X Processor 4 makes this camera feel very snappy, so it's gonna be a lot faster than your experience with older iterations of this camera. Maybe not so much the F, but definitely anything like the T and you know, below, you'll definitely notice a difference. In terms of image quality, if you love the previous iterations of this camera, then you definitely will love the images coming from this. I think the big difference with this camera is, since they did redesign the optical formula of that 23mm f2 lens built in the camera, you're gonna have a change, not a super drastic change, but a change in the overall aesthetic of the rendering of your images. So in the previous iterations, I noticed that the out of focus areas, like the background and the bokeh, seemed a little bit more smooth, kind of more reminiscent to a lot of modern lenses that you'll run into. I kind of compare it to how the Nikon 58mm 1.4G lens rendered the images, where you just get this very kind of overall smooth and pleasing look to the image. And I think I honestly prefer that over how this lens renders the image, where you get more of a vintage feel, a bit of a busier bokeh. But I definitely like this too, and I think that for the majority of people out there, even if you do prefer the rendering of the older lens, you're still going to prefer the pros that come to the redesign and the optical formula for this camera. So the biggest one that stands out is that if you are doing more of that kind of like pseudo macro work, and you're getting really close up to your subjects, then you are going to notice that even wide open, this lens is a lot sharper than the previous lens was. And pretty much everybody knows that because this is, you know, this camera has been out for a while and there's a million reviews on it. But, you know, I figured why not add my perspective out there in the YouTube world, and you know, it kind of helps me get my thoughts together about a camera like this from making a video like this. Another cool thing about this camera is that the ISO range is expanded, so now the base ISO, or the native ISO of this camera, is going to be 160, and then it goes all the way up to 12,800, and then you can extend even beyond that too if you need to. So if you're taking a picture close up, or if you're kind of using the macro mode in this camera, I definitely prefer the updated lens. But for you know, portraits or pictures where your subject is more of at a medium distance from your camera, then I definitely prefer the older lens, because you did get more of that perceived subject separation in the photo. This updated lens will also perform better in terms of flare resistance, and that's kind of a personal subjective thing too. So if you liked a little bit more of a unique character in the flare, then you might want to go with the X100V for one of the previous iterations. But if you like a lens that's more corrected for that stuff, then this is going to make you really happy. And as always, something that sets this camera apart from the other Fuji cameras is that it has a built-in ND filter, which is really amazing, and I love that they put that in here. And it really helps with the you know, effect that you get from the electronic shutter, where I guess in this camera they probably use electronic front curtain shutter as the primary method for capturing the picture. But if you don't know, if you shoot at faster shutter speeds wide open with the lens, you're going to get a weird effect with your out of focus areas. So those specular highlights are going to take on a different shape because it has a leaf shutter in here. So you know, so actually I take back what I said about the electronic front curtain shutter, because the weird effect is that you're getting is going to be from the leaf shutter. So yeah, if you're shooting at faster shutter speeds, then you're going to start to notice that your image might look weird. You know, not the subject, but the out of focus areas. So if you turn on that ND filter, which is cool because you can just kind of program one of these buttons on the camera to do it quickly, then you can shoot at a slower shutter speed and avoid those negative effects of the shutter. I want to start wrapping up this video. My wishes for the next iteration of this camera is that I hope that one day we're able to utilize the ND filter in video mode, because that would be really helpful, because this is really a camera that you just want to, you know, take this camera and nothing else, and be super minimal. And it's weird, or I shouldn't say weird, it's a shame that you can't use the ND filter in video mode, because then I think that would just make this camera much more usable for photographers and videographers that want to get a quick, you know, shot, or maybe a quick vlogging bit, but they don't want to take all of the extra stuff with them. Also, even though that there does seem to be a noticeable improvement in the autofocus system in this camera compared to the previous iteration, I do think that compared to a lot of other modern cameras, the autofocus is a bit sluggish. And I noticed that even when my kids are running around, more so in lower light scenarios, but that is something that I wish for Fuji to improve in the next iteration. So yeah, the biggest surprise for me for this camera was that I did start to reach for it more, you know, genuinely reach for it more than my XPRO3 camera, just because of the overall package. You just get a lot of versatility in such a small package, and it's just easy. It's easy to get great shots, and I love using this camera for street photography, but even more than that, I like to use this camera to capture family moments. So you know, bringing this on a trip is just so much less intrusive than bringing a bigger camera like a, you know, Canon EOS R5 or something like that. And then with the, you know, the leaf shutter, the improved lens in this camera, the ability to get really sharp close-up shots now, it's just, yeah, it's an awesome camera. So, you know, if you are on the fence about this camera versus the XPRO series cameras, then I would still say, you know, try them both out, see if you can rent them both before making a decision, because it's just a very personal choice. But, you know, in my next video, when I talk about the teleconverters, I will start to talk about those kind of advantages of getting a camera where you can switch out the lenses versus having a fixed lens camera like this. So if you're interested, or if you dislike my content in general, if you like my Canon stuff, I have a lot of Canon stuff out there. So if you didn't know that, then check that out. I definitely have a lot of older videos about RF lenses and all of the Canon mirrorless system cameras. But I hope to see you guys in the next video. And yeah, that's it. I'll talk to you later.